One of the features of the Port win tonight was their centre bounce clearance work. Joey, you've had a close look at that.
Yeah, just the clearance work in general, because coming into the game, that was an opportunity for Carlton. They are a top two clearance and contest team, have been for most of the year, and it's been a real weakness for Port Adelaide. They sit bottom two or bottom four for the contest and clearance, but tonight they just outworked Carlton. They had a class difference, so Carlton might have been able to get their hand on the ball first possession more, but we speak about the fleet-footedness and how quick Port Adelaide were to clear from stoppage, and we saw that particularly in the second quarter. So after the first term that Carlton had, we thought they'd come out and really make a statement, particularly with their leaders around the ground, in the middle of the ground, but they just couldn't do it. They couldn't keep up with them. We've spoken about Bergman. Butters again was sensational. They dropped the tag after half-time, and in the end they put on a clinic in regards to the scoreboard. So in the end, the overall clearance numbers, Jason, look a bit flattering. Carlton got on top late when the game was over, but when it was there to be won, Port Adelaide did all the damage. They were plus 33 from points from clearance, and from centre bounce they kicked 3 goals to 1, and it was a pretty impressive performance from Port Adelaide in an area that hadn't been a strength this year.
Huge difference in the quality of the clearances. You'd see Port run, carry, look for targets. It was often a hack kick from the Blues, and as you showed in that first one, Joe, they got their hands on it first, Carlton, a number of times, but they were just overwhelmed by the Port midfield, who'd then take it away and turn it again into a quality clearance.
What about Bergman on Cripps? He will go to bed tonight going, I did a good job.
Yeah, he's done a great job since about round 6 or 7 when he moved into the midfield and has played a few roles. He has been sensational. He's been a player that has evolved into being I said it earlier, like a Jordan Dawson type player that can go to it and play in the midfield and be damaging with his foot skills. He can mark it overhead. He's a beautiful athlete, and we are seeing that now. He's growing by the week, and there's no surprise, Ralphie, why there's, as you said, 6 or 8 Melbourne clubs into him, because he's the prototype midfielder I think every club wants.
And yet Port Adelaide will say, if he does leave in the end, we've left no stone unturned. So they've given him the midfield time that he wants. They're absolutely trying to work hard so he's comfortable there, doing everything he can to bring his family across at times. They've given him a monster deal. As they've said, we probably rate him more than any other Victorian club, and yet as he's told his friends across the year, he'd love to get home to whether it's Bayside or any of those 6 or 8 clubs that are chasing him. They can all offer him midfield time, and the only thing that's in Port Adelaide's favour is that if he leaves, it's a bidding war. So is he worth a first rounder? Is he worth a top 5 pick? When Dan Houston left, they did it in their favour to try and get the biggest haul. What is he worth if he does leave this football club, which would be a shattering blow, given that Butters, of course, potentially goes the year after?
Well, you could argue he's worth 2 first rounders depending on where they are, if they're in the teens, but certainly Port Adelaide will be asking for a lot, and rightly so. He's elevated his game to an elite level, so yeah, clubs are going to have to bid pretty hard, but I think someone will pay overs to get him.
So this is an indefensible loss for Michael Voss. So for so often he's been able to say, we're the #1 clearance side, we understand our mid-forward connection. How does he explain this to Graham Wright and the powers that be, including Robert Priestley, his new president? Because he could always talk about the positives. Against North Melbourne for 20 minutes, inexplicable. Everything that has gone wrong at this football club could go wrong, did go wrong, and we saw that for an entire 4-quarter effort tonight. So how would he explain that to his board? Because that's what he'll have to do in coming weeks.
Well, the great thing about Graham Wright going to Carlton is he will sit there and make some calm, considered decisions. So he'll sit back, he'll have a look at everything. He's very experienced in making decisions, and he's not afraid to make decisions either. But he also understands the need at times for stability and what benefits there are from making certain decisions. Now, right now, if you change the coach, that's going to appease the supporters that are going nuts. But does it help the footy club? Well, I don't know. And Graham Wright will make that decision and make the decision that best benefits the club and how quickly they can turn around the way the fortunes are flagging at the moment.
So North Melbourne's 20 minutes, and people could say that, OK, this is a North Melbourne club that's on the rise. As I said, Port Adelaide has struggled, 12th in the competition. The problem is this is a list that's absolutely in its prime for Carlton. These were supposed to be the golden years. They have had 10 years of rebuilding. Cripps 30, Curnow 28, Mackay 27, Silvani 27, Wiedering 27. So you can say it's the list. It's not about Michael Voss. Yes, they can make changes. This was supposed to be the time when Michael Voss was maximising a list. And again, you talked about it pre-match. This is a club that's good enough to get into a preliminary final 2 years ago and make a final last year. So we can't have it both ways. We can't say that the list is good enough to make finals, and all of a sudden now it's not about Michael Voss, it's only about the list.
Well, it's interesting because a couple of years ago everyone was critical that Carlton relied too heavily on their stars. It was Cripps, Curnow, Wiedering and Walsh and the rest didn't. Now that they're not performing, maybe we're seeing what is underneath this list, and maybe it's not as good because when the stars aren't dominating like they have previously, we're seeing a team that look very ordinary. So I suppose it's damned if you do, damned if you don't.
The other thing you've got to remember is not every rebuild works. I mean, you can sit there and you know what you want to get, but you don't quite get exactly the players you're looking for. So sometimes you have to settle for something a little bit different and it's not quite as good. So not every rebuild guarantees you success or playing consistent finals.
That was the oldest side Carlton has fielded since 1944, Joey.
Yeah, and they've got some decisions to make. There are some senior players, I mean, that are probably going, well, are they going to be part of the future? They've got to bring in some leg speed. They've got to bring in some more ball users. So I think that, I'm not going to be over dramatic with this team. I think that no doubt they've been poor the last couple of weeks. As I said earlier, I think that they look like a team that don't believe they can play finals, and they lost that little bit of hope tonight, which is really disappointing. You would expect much better. But they can make some adjustments over summer. I said Elijah Holland's an important player. Jagger Smith will be back. They've got some other players, Walsh, if they can get him fit. And if you can bring in 2 or 3 others, it can still change pretty quickly. I don't think you need to throw the baby out with the bathwater, Jason, and start again. I just think they've got to just take it with a clear set of eyes and just make some calculated decisions.
Yeah, and they didn't get a lot out of their leaders tonight. The experienced players that they probably looked to lean on. They brought in a couple of debutants who we saw, and maybe they'll get more games into these young players over the back end of the season. But I mean, we're looking at the match rankings here for players that they desperately need to have an impact, that are incredibly experienced, and they just didn't get enough out of them. But as I said earlier, when we saw that first half unfold, it just feels like the world's caved in on them, and they've just buckled under the pressure of all the expectation and all the disappointment that they've delivered thus far.
And there are huge decisions ahead on some of those players.
Yep,
so,
correct.
Look, Sam Docherty, that's going to have to be a really tough decision on one of the favourite sons who's beat cancer twice and he's got good possession numbers, but let's face it, his impact is very limited.
Again, but this is Graham Wright will lead,
yes,
and he won't let emotion make these decisions. It'll be clear and clinical and what's best to get this club going in the right direction.
So are you both right now holding firm on Michael Voss as the 2026 coach?
I'm not adamant, but I just don't think at the moment it's the right decision just to get a new coach. I think there's other levers you can pull first to see if they can regroup and go again next season. That's where I'm at the moment. If the losses continue like this for the remainder of the season, and maybe they feel that the Voss has lost the playing group or something like that, it might change. But tonight in isolation and the performance last week, yes, but over the bigger picture, I still think there's a bit to work with.
And there's little things that the Carlton Footy Club can do. It can announce a review. That can appease the supporters. OK, we think Michael Voss is our man, but we'll make sure that Graham Wright, who has been at this football club since December, so he's not coming in to make new decisions. He knows everything that is right and wrong with this football club. OK, I'm going to interview 20 people across all stakeholders. That might buy some time. There is a prospect at some stage. Is Ash Hansen worth looking at as a caretaker coach? I don't think anyone believes that's the situation right now, but that might potentially allow this club to say, OK, is it Michael Voss or is it the list? They're things a long way down the track, but we've had a couple of horror losses, and the teams ahead, Sarah, can make an awful mess of the Carlton Football Club.
Yeah, if you have a look at their run home, the Pies, that's Friday night footy, that's going to be huge. Brisbane, I mean, the next five, really, all of them, except for the Bombers.
And some of those challenges might be great for them. You can't panic. The last thing you want to do is see a club panic and start reacting to the outside noise. So, again, they'll make decisions over that run home, and they'll look at the performances and the consistency of players, and they'll look at who's available in an executive or supporting or coaching role as well as in a playing role, and they'll make some changes.
And Michael Voss's best friend right now is Carlton's history, in which right now, after a loss like this, they would sack the coach by Monday. And so these are very smart men, Graham Wright and Robert Priestley, who's been the boss of JP Morgan. They're guys who, as you say, are very measured, so they'll take all the time they want. They will not be making hasty decisions.
A bit of match review news to have a look at involving Adam Sarden-Vicentini.
That's right. This one's right down the middle. So Dante Vicentini's a live chance to escape suspension, even though Adam Sarden was concussed and will miss against Collingwood. Here's the rough rule. If you brace for contact and don't take steps into that incident, it's probably okay. If you take 1 or 2 steps towards an opponent, it's labelled a bump rather than bracing. So if we look at Vicentini here, he's walking towards the ball, he turns around. He never really walks towards Sard. This is where he changed direction.
He just stops. He just stops, Ralphie.
Yeah.
He was originally calling for the hand pass over the top. So he stops, he doesn't do anything untoward. Saad runs into it. I don't know what we expect. The only thing he could have done to avoid contact there was jump out of the way. And we can't possibly expect players to do that.
Joey?
To me, it looks like he blocks his run. He doesn't lay a bump. So I've always thought there's a difference. I know there's fine lines, but I would hate to see him get suspended for something like that. He's just blocked his run. Unfortunately, got him high, but I don't think it was a careless act. It wasn't a bump.
Trouble is, one bloke's 6'10" and the other bloke's 5'10", and he just stood there.
And we saw with Judd McVeigh a couple of weeks ago. He got off for a very similar incident against Richards, didn't jump off the ground, didn't take steps into him. So I think as we look at that labbed up vision, I think we feel right now that, he's going to be available to take on Brisbane.
I'd be disappointed if he got rubbed out for that.
Okay, it is time now for our KFC FLG moment of the match, and it involves the veteran Travis Boak returning for this game. Kicking a goal, he had 21 disposals for the match. This in game number 379. It was great to see him back, Jace.
Yeah, he said he felt fresh because he'd had a few weeks out. He just keeps rolling along. We know the fitness regimen that he goes through each and every year to get himself in condition to play, and it's paid off because he's, 380-odd games and still going.
He and Scott Pendlebury set the bar, don't they, for that discipline and professionalism, and it tells in their games tally.
They've set the bar really high, but it's proof you can do it if you want to, and they are two of the more professional players that have ever played the game, in particular Travis Boak. So nice to see him still just enjoying, you can see savouring the moment, knowing there's not many games of footy left for him, but he's enjoying every bit of it.
Probably real boring characters too, Joey, given how hard they work.
Sometimes generally go hand in hand, the most professional, and sometimes more boring.